In this video, we're going to be building a ChatGPT plugin from scratch, and we're going to be doing this using JavaScript. Now, I've found there are two main ways that you might consider building one of these plugins in JavaScript. One is by building a server using something like Express.js or some other web framework and implementing all of the routes and stuff in that way. The other option would be using something like Next.js. And Next.js has API routes, which kind of abstracts away the need to write some of the low-level code that you might need to implement this sort of thing. So I think that either are pretty good options. I think it's a lot easier, though, for people to maybe deploy something like Next.js because they can just push it up to Vercel. But there are also, pretty easy ways to just deploy a Node app as well these days. So I think I'm going to try doing both. But for this video, we're going to be building using Next.js. And we want to future-proof this. So we're going to be using the Next.js app directory, and we're going to be kind of opting into that newer functionality using routes. So with that being said, we're just going to start writing code from scratch, and we're going to be building a to-dos plugin. We want our plugin to be able to list our to-dos. We want the plugin to be able to create a to-do and delete a to-do. We also want to ask the plugin questions about our to-dos, like how many to-dos do we have left? And I don't know, any other information that might be able to kind of be retrieved so we can kind of see the full power of how this stuff works. So by the end of this video, I think it's hopefully enough to get you started understanding how to put all of this stuff together, building out your own custom plugin. Now, what you need typically for this sort of thing often is some type of persistence. We're going to be storing everything in memory because I want to make this, again, as simple as possible without having to deal with the database. So we're going to be just storing this in a kind of helper class that will be almost like a store. But in production or in most real-world applications, you probably might want to be building this using some type of database. But other than that, I think everything is very, very real-world in how you might actually build something yourself. But I think the challenge for me was kind of putting all these things together, understanding how the different configuration files works, dealing with CORS issues and things like that. Now, the code base for this tutorial is linked below. I have a ChatGPT plugin starter project that I'm kind of building off of that you can just clone and run. All of that code is also available for you to copy and paste if you get stuck at any time during this tutorial. So with that being said, we want to go ahead and just start writing some code. So to do that, we're just going to scaffold out a new Next.js app. So I'm going to use npx create next app. So we're going to use TypeScript, we're going to use ESLint, we're going to opt out of the src directory, we're going to opt into the app directory, and we'll take the default import alias. And while that's being created, we're going to go ahead and open this up in our text editor. All right, so we have our app created, and what we're going to do next is we're going to go into the OpenAI docs as well as the ChatGPT interface to kind of take a look at a couple of things. So they do now have these chat plugins documentation here, and it says limited alpha. And if you have access to this, then you will also be able to kind of go into the interface and use this. But if not, you can still, I believe, see the documentation here and maybe follow along. So here you have the introduction, you have getting started, you have a couple of examples. These are in Python, but they're still very useful and they've helped me a lot, especially understanding how to deal with the CORS issues as well. So these are going to be the docs that you might reference. They also have a plugin repo that has example projects, so I would definitely check that out as well. You can probably just say like OpenAI, ChatGPT plugin, GitHub, examples. And they also have a quick start as well. So here's one of the examples. Plugins quick start is another. So yeah, I would definitely check out their repos as well if you want to just explore more code bases. And we also have the interface open here. So to use a plugin, you'll see that you have this option if you are able to use this for the plugin store. And here you have all the different plugins that are available. And for developers, you would click down here where it says develop your own plugin. And this is what we're going to be doing in just a moment, where we kind of, register the plugin that we're about to build. So these are some of the resources. And then the last thing I'll just jump to is my GitHub, where we have the Next.js ChatGPT plugin starter. So this might be another reference for you. So all this stuff put together will hopefully be a lot of good resources to get you started. So now that we've kind of gone over that, we want to go back into our app and we want to set up a couple of pieces of configuration. So we need to have really three main pieces of configuration. The first one is being us setting up our headers in order to enable cores for the http chat.openai.com. So we can go to next.config.js. And what we want to do is below the experimental app directory, we want to add another section for headers. And here we're going to say for /path wildcard, we want to set the access control allow origin to chat.openai.com. This is necessary in order to register your plugin. If not, if you don't do this, it just won't work. So go ahead and set that. And that's really the only update we need to make there. The next thing that we want to go into is the public directory. And we want to create a folder called .wellknown. And then here we want to create a file called ai.plugin.json. And this JSON is kind of the manifest to describe what our plugin does, the version, different things like what is the URL for us to get the main configuration, which is the OpenAPI.yaml that describes all these other things. We also set things like authentication type and other things like that we're going to look at. So this is kind of the first piece of configuration that you're probably going to set. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste in what we have for this app. We have a schema version of version 1. We have a name for the human. We have a name for the model. We have a description for the human. We have a description for the model. And we have an auth type, which in this case is none, but you can also do auth if you would like. For the API type, we have OpenAPI. For the URL, this is going to be where we have our main configuration. This defines our data model. This defines our routing and things like that. And then we have an authenticated property there. We also have a few different things like the logo URL and the contact email and the legal info. That stuff isn't so important. Maybe the logo URL is probably good to set. And we don't really have a bunch of images that we can work with. So maybe we'll just snatch one of these here. I might just say vercel.svg. Just to have something show up, even though it's not going to be exactly for our app. You might want to create like a little cool to-do icon. I think I have that in my repo. So once you set up this AI plugin JSON, then we can now reference this OpenAPI.yaml. And both the well-known /AI plugin.json as well as the OpenAI.yaml both need to be in the public directory because they need to be accessible from the main domain. So this would be like HTTP localhost 3000 in our example /OpenAPI and /wellknown. So under public, I'm going to create a file called OpenAPI.yaml. And this is going to be where we create the main configuration for our app. So we'll start off with the initial setup here where we're going to have OpenAI version 3.0.1, a title, a description, and a version. And then we are setting the main server URL here as localhost 3000. All of this stuff, by the way, is documented here. So you have like getting started, where we kind of go over the plugin manifest. We already went over that. You have all the different fields and stuff that you can work with. And then what we're doing now is this OpenAPI definition. And this is kind of speccing out our API. So that's kind of where we are now. Next, we want to create the different paths that we want to make available. And then we're also going to reference a data model, or more of like a schema, I would say, that's going to give us or describe the information that's going to be available through those endpoints. So the first path that we're going to set is /API/todos. And in in Next.js, you have these API routes. By default, they're /API. So that's kind of how we're getting that. And then we're going to have a path called todos. And this is going to be a get operation. And this is just going to return an array of todos. And we're going to define that schema down here. So we're going to have 3 endpoints. We're going to have get todos. We're going to have post to create a to-do and post to delete a to-do. So now that we have the basic /get, we're going to go down here and we're going to add a new field or a new endpoint for /create to-do. And this one is going to have something that we didn't have in the last one, which is a request body. And this will define, exactly what that data looks like that needs to be coming into the post. And in our case, it's just going to be a pretty basic object with like a to-do. And then the last thing that we want to set up is the delete to-do operation or endpoint. And this is going to be at API/delete to-do. We have a very similar request body that we're going to define right here. And that's about it. So those are all of our endpoints. We have /delete to-do, /create to-do, and /todos. These 2 at the bottom are post, and the first one is a get request. The next thing is where we're going to define our schemas and our data models. So I'm going to set a field called components, and then a field below that called schemas. And we're going to have 3 schemas. We're going to have delete to-do request, add to-do request, and get to-do response. So for delete to-do request, it's going to be an object. The object is going to have a field called to-do. The to-do is going to have a field called string. And that's kind of about it. So pretty simple setup there. Then we're going to have a add to-do request. That's going to look very similar, where we have a property of to-do with the value of string, and this is going to be the to-do that we add to the list. And then finally, we're going to have the get to-dos response. This is going to be an object with a single property called to-dos. The to-dos is going to be an array of type object, and this will return the list of to-dos. And that's about it. So that is our entire configuration for both the OpenAPI specification as well as the manifest for the AI plugin.json. So I can go ahead and I can go ahead and close those 2. And what we need to do to get this working is to go ahead and set up our API routes. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into this app/API, and we have hello. You can leave that there, you can delete it, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And what we're going to do next is create 3 folders. The first one's going to be called to-dos. The second one is going to be called create to-do. And then the last one is going to be called delete to-do. And in each of these routes, or in each of these folders, we're going to create a file called routes.ts. And this is going to be where we define our route. Okay, so we have create to-do /route, delete to-do /route, and to-dos /route. So I think what we'll start with is the to-dos /route, where we're going to be interacting and fetching the list of to-dos. And what we need in order for this to work is to have an actual list of to-dos. We don't really have that class or that, I would say, functionality set up yet. So what I'm going to do is create a folder called lib, and we're going to create a really basic store here. And I'll call this new file in this lib folder to-dos class. And then in this to-dos class, we can go ahead and create a really basic store for us to store the to-dos and also, be able to update the list of to-dos. So to get started, we'll create an interface, and we'll then create a type of to-dos type, and this will be an array of to-dos. And then we'll create a to-dos class. And here we'll set an array of to-dos equal to an empty array. We'll have a function for creating a to-do. And this is going to take in a to-do and then just update the array with the new item. We're going to have a function for getting the to-dos. So get to-dos is just going to return the array of to-dos. And then finally, we'll have a function called delete to-do. And this will delete the to-do. And this caveat for what we're building here is it's going to look for the first item with the same name. So this isn't using like a unique identifier or anything. So this is kind of a naive implementation, a pretty basic implementation for this tutorial. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to initialize a new instance of that class, and then we're just going like a singleton, and then we're going to go ahead and export the to-dos. So what we can now do is import this to-dos, and we can say to-dos.create-to-do, to-dos.get-to-do, and to-dos.delete-to-do. And this will allow us to kind of update some local state that's essentially just persisted in memory. Again, when a server gets restarted, you're going to lose all of that memory. So persistence in a real-world app would probably mean using a database, or would for sure mean using a database. So now that we have that set up, we're going to go back into that to-dos. Let's see here. That to-dos/route.ts, and we're going to go ahead and get started here. So we're going to go ahead and import the next response from next server and the to-dos from the to-dos class. And then we're going to define two functions. One is for get, and then one is for options. The get requests is it's self-explanatory. It's for kind of fetching the to-dos, and the options is for pre-flight request. And this is necessary to deal with some of the CORS issues that I had when I was first getting all this set up. And what we basically want to do is return from the get next response.json. And for the to-dos, we're just going to call to-dos.get-to-dos, and this is just going to return the array of to-dos. And then this is important here to make sure this is working to get these headers and this configuration right. So we're going to set the status as 200. We're going to set the access control allow origin to chat.openai.com. We're going to set the methods there. You might only need maybe get requests here, obviously. For the access control headers, we're going to pass in content type, authorization, OpenAI, ephemeral user ID, and OpenAI conversation ID. I'm pretty sure, from what I understand, all that stuff is necessary. You might play it around and be able to remove some of that stuff, but this should work. So we have the get requests set up, and now we want to set up the options, which is going to be very similar to that, except for the first argument, we're just not returning anything. It's just an empty object, and we're just setting the access control allow origin, the methods, and the headers. So for API/route, we have everything ready to go, and we should be able to go ahead and close that out. The next thing that we want to do is go ahead and do the create to do. So I can open up create to do, and we're going to go ahead and open up route.ts. And honestly, these are all going to be very similar to what we've done in the past in the last file. The only difference is that we might have some type of argument that's passed into the request that will pass into the function call to the to-dos class. So we're going to also import next request, but now next response as well from next server. We're going to import that to-dos class, or that to-dos instance from to-dos class. We're going to have a post, and we're going to have an options. For the post, we're going to go ahead and get the body out of the request. And then what we want to do is create a to-do with the data that comes back there. And we just call todos.createTodo, passing in the body. And then what we can then say is we want to call next.response.json. The first argument, we just set success is true. The second argument, we're doing similar stuff with the status and the headers, where we set the access control allow origin, the access control allow methods, and the access control allow headers. And then finally, for the options, this is going to be very similar to the last one that we did in todos.ts, where we pass in an empty object as the first argument and status and headers as the second argument. And the last thing we want to do is update the delete to do route. And just like before, this is going to be very similar. We're going to import next request and next response. We're going to import the to-dos from to-dos class. We're going to have a post, and we're going to have an options function. We're going to get the body out of the request. We're going to call todos.delete to-do, passing in that to-do. And then we'll just return the exact same response as we did last time, where we just set success is true, status and headers. Same exact status and headers as the last one. And then for the options, this is going to be the same options that we've returned in the last two, where we just set the first argument as an empty object, status 200, and the headers. And if we save that, then we should be ready to start testing this out. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run a build, and then we're going to run the server as opposed to running it in dev mode. Because if you run it in dev mode, you often have the server gets restarted and you lose your state, and therefore your app doesn't really work. So I'm going to run npm run build, and then we're going to run npm start. And then our app should be running on localhost 3000. So I can now go into the ChatGPT interface. I can click on plugin store, developer, and plugin. Use localhost 3000. We see that our manifest is validated as well as our OpenAI spec. So I can go ahead and click install local plugin. And we see that we have that little Vercel logo there. So to test this out, I might say list my to-dos. And you see that it's invoking the to-dos plugin. And it says I don't have any to-dos, so I'm going to add a couple of to-dos. I'm going to say add to-dos for walk the dog, book a flights, and buy groceries. And what this should do is hit that plugin 3 separate times with 3 separate requests. One for adding, each individual to-do. And our feedback is here. Great, I've added the following to-dos to your list. So I might say, how many to-dos do I have? And the next thing I might ask for is to kind of delete a to-do. I can say, I walked the dog, please remove it from my to-dos. And as we see, it's removed the walk the dog to do from our to-do list, and we have 2 to-dos, and everything seems to be working as expected. So that's kind of it for this demo. I think that for me, the challenge of all of this isn't the actual programming of the logic. It was actually configuring all this stuff and getting it working together with cores and routing and the manifest and all that stuff. I think once you get beyond that, programming this stuff is actually not that hard, because it's just like building any type of server-side application where you have interactions with some type of data store. It might be a little challenging to get auth and stuff working. I haven't gone into that, but there are a lot of ways to do authentication, like with OAuth and stuff like that. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot. If you did, please subscribe and share my channel, and like the video and comment if you have any comments, and look out for my next video. And if you have any suggestions, please drop them in the comments. Thanks.